Hi, I'm Tracy Soltis, your leading health and nutrition coach and molecular biologist. I've consulted with hundreds of people around the world on their human journey. So if you're a seeker looking for answers, information and knowledge, you'll find it here. Come on a journey with me as I explore the science, the physical body, and the cognitive and energetic space of what it really means to be human. All right, welcome back everybody. And today I'm joined by my beautiful guest, Miss Carrie Reedy. Hi, Carrie.
Hi.
Carrie is a university qualified nutritionist with specialist training in functional nutrition and lifestyle medicine. She is passionate about helping people use food as medicine to support their health and healing. She advocates for a lower carbohydrate intake to promote better metabolic health and fuel delivery to the cells of the body so that they can function optimally. Carrie is a certified keto coach and has completed training with the National Nutrition Network in therapeutic carbohydrate restricted diets. Her core message is that there is hope for a greater health and well-being when we use our everyday food choices to optimize our nutritional status, allowing the body to take better care of itself. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I listened to that intro and I'm like, oh, do I do all that?
You do. You're amazing. It's so nice to hear that back though, isn't it? It's like, look at all the work you put into helping other people. I think it's amazing. So we've got a really awesome chat today. And I just wanted to start because some of our listeners might not have heard you on the podcast before. So just tell us a little bit about you, who you are, what you do, what you're doing on your day-to-day with your clients and things like that, and just a little bit of intro so people get to know you a bit more.
Sure. So like you said, I'm a nutritionist, so I really focus on considering the role that food plays in our everyday health. I work in my own private practice, so I see clients on a day-to-day basis, but I'm also a really big advocate of sharing the health message. I do a lot of presentations around town through some of the local government organisations, sharing that message about how we can look at food in a slightly different way. I think for a long time we've been sort of educated about food is calories, food is energy to the body, without really focusing on that message that food is nutrients to the body, and we get the nutrients, the vitamins, the minerals, the phytochemicals, all these other properties that we need from the food we eat. And so the choices that we make play a huge role in our overall health.
Yes, because we really look to food for that pleasure stimulation constantly, which is fine.
Yes, it is.
Should be it should be enjoyable to eat, but we should also be making the right choices so that we're actually fueling our cells with everything they need, right?
Yeah. And it's nice when we can do both of those things at the same time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you get used to it as you start to understand how your body works and what it needs, and you start changing your habits a bit more. The things that you might have thought, were a little bit boring or whatever are actually really amazing, and then you actually really start enjoying them. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And you can find new and interesting ways of preparing food. I remember as a kid, sorry, Mum, but, cook the death out of things like Brussels sprouts, to the point that you'd go, I'm never going to eat them ever again when I have choice over my foods.
Yeah, totally. My mum was the same, exactly the same, boiled Brussels sprouts. Yeah. And what I do now is I actually fry them with bacon.
Oh, they're so good, aren't they?
And it's completely different experience, right? So you just have to know how to prepare your food.
Absolutely. I would say it's the same with asparagus in a jar. That was my memory of asparagus as a child. Now I'm like, please give me asparagus. It feels like such a treat food.
Yes, exactly. And so we've got a really important topic today. We're going to be talking about thyroid health and a little bit into Hashimotos and Graves' disease and so much more. And I can't wait to get started because I know this is something quite close to your heart.
Absolutely.
Having had and been through that Hashimoto's journey yourself, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what your experience with that was.
Oh, I refer to my Hashimoto's experience as the lost years because I'll go back into some context. My oldest son is 30 and I was part of a postpartum thyroid study, so 30 years ago, where they took a blood sample and they were doing all of this research on women with thyroid conditions. And I got the results to that about 10 years later in the mail and found I had all of these antibodies. My thyroid results looked normal, but I had all of these antibodies. And I remember by that stage I had 3 kids. I was exhausted, felt like I was dragging myself around. And I took the piece of paper to the doctor and said, this is the smoking gun. This is the problem. And she sort of said, no, your thyroid. And then they did some subsequent testing and said, yes, you still have thyroid antibodies, but your thyroid levels are normal.
Yeah.
It's because you have 3 kids. You're a busy mum. That you're tired. And I was like, oh, okay, I didn't know any better. They didn't really test anything else out at that time. But again, it was probably a good 5 or 10 years after that where I eventually, dragged myself to somebody else and said, could this still be the thyroid? And even then, my thyroid levels looked okay. I mean, they weren't brilliant. They were inside the reference range, but I was told, no, it's not your thyroid. And it was so frustrating because I look back and that period of time really was a blur.
Yeah.
I was fatigued, hair, it wasn't great. My skin was terrible. I remember someone saying to me, are you a reptile?
Oh, no.
Because my skin was like, on my legs, it was really scaly. If I wasn't slapping something on my skin, it was so dry year round.
Yeah.
Lots of other thyroid symptoms, harder to lose weight, just felt puffy. And yet I kept being told, this can't be the issue.
Yeah.
You get to that point where I think I became so hell-bent on working out what was going on.
Yeah.
I eventually found someone that said, well, let's just have a deeper look at this, tested my iodine, very little iodine in my body, so it made it harder for my body to make thyroid hormones. But antibody-wise, that's the immune system autoimmune reaction, was still crazy.
Yeah.
And, once we were able to get some of those things under control, it just felt like I sort of felt like I woke up.
Yeah.
I sort of came out of myself. And, one of the things that an integrated doctor said to me at that point was, you need to remove gluten from your diet. And I'm like, well, why should I? I don't have celiac disease. I think I was always a bit of a rebel. Yes. I don't want to do something that seems hard. And literally it was sort of within 4 to 6 weeks, I remember getting up one morning and feeling like, my goodness, I could actually do whatever I want to do today. I have the energy. And it was really just taking some of that pressure off my immune system, loving my thyroid, giving it the nutrients it needed.
Yeah.
And what I find now is I talk to so many other women that have a similar story that, they've gone to a doctor, they've asked, could it be their thyroid? They've suspected there's something going on there. And because we do the bare minimum in terms of testing, they're not getting the answers they need. They're being told, no, it's not your thyroid. Look elsewhere. It's your lifestyle. It's this, it's that. And they're losing time. They're losing precious time. I remember my kids sort of used to say I was almost so grumpy. Yeah. Because I was exhausted. Yeah. Everything was so hard.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like we're seeing so many more cases of thyroid issues now. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't know the statistics.
Yeah.
And I don't think we actually would have those statistics to be able to be aware of.
But because people just think it's regular burnout or it's just one of those things, like you said, busy mum.
Yeah.
I'm just a busy mum, right? And not even picking up on anything until it actually gets to a real physical symptom and that progresses and then we link it back.
And I think the tragedy in all of that is in terms of our own health, it's easy to unwind in the early stages. If a thyroid condition got picked up early, there's less repair work that needs to happen. If we leave it till all of our pathology looks really crazy and we have all of these symptoms, for one, we then don't have the energy to do all we need to unwind it, but two, it's much harder to unwind. And so knowing early gives us far more scope to make the most amount of difference that we can long term.
Okay, so let's tell everyone what a thyroid is.
Yeah, well, that probably would help.
Because, this is a common thing, and this is no judgment on anyone, of course, but sometimes we talk about these things, but we don't actually know what they are.
Sure.
So we might get this diagnosis or we might have had the word thyroid kind of come into our little world, so to speak. We're like, what is that? I don't even know what that is. And let's tell people, what is a thyroid?
Sure. So the thyroid is a little butterfly-shaped gland. It actually just sits at the front of your neck. Ideally, you don't feel it. If you do feel it, then there's already something going on there.
Yeah.
But it controls so many things. It's such a small part of our physiology and anatomy, but it has really far-flung impacts. It controls our metabolism. It controls things like the speed with which our digestive tract works. It does control things like our skin. You know, there's a role I mentioned before about dry skin, but we tend to have really dry skin if our thyroid isn't working well. It's involved with weight management because it determines the speed of which our metabolism works. It's involved with the cardiovascular system. So really what ends up happening if your thyroid's not working well, either it's working not, like less capacity, or even if it has more capacity, we're getting a lot of symptoms.
Yeah.
And the reason it's hard to pick up is because those symptoms are everywhere. It's not just in one place. It's not like if you have, a dodgy knee, you feel it in your dodgy knee.
Yeah.
You don't feel thyroid symptoms in that thyroid at the front of your neck. You feel it as aches and fatigue and just generally not feeling like you have the vitality that you would like.
It has a massive knock-on effect everywhere else on the body, right? And there's 3 very specific hormones it produces. And I know that that's another thing that people kind of get told, oh, like your T3 or T4 is up or low or whatever. And people, I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is, but my doctor just told me that my T3 is really high, but I don't know what it does. And so I did actually write this down, and please correct me if this is not right, because I know that you look at this every day, but so you've got your T3, so that's a hormone that controls energy levels, temperature, metabolism, heart rate, blood pressure, and the developing baby as well if you're pregnant.
Very involved in all of those reproduction, in the reproductive system, from before conception all the way through as baby's growing.
Yeah, and so that in itself, in what I've just said, there's nothing there that's happening in the neck, right? Everything else is everywhere, like temperature. It's regulating the temperature, your ups and your downs, your metabolism, how fast everything's flowing, like you were saying, through the digestive system. These are very external processes away from the thyroid. And then we've got the T4, and so that controls how the heart works, also a bit of metabolism, muscle health, bones and brain. Would you agree with that one as well?
So there's actually a few more. There's actually a T1 and a T2 as
Yes,
well.
thank you very much.
So what happens is that, because the thyroid is not just a producer of hormones, it's also a sensor of what's going on in the body. We have the pituitary and the hypothalamus in the brain. They release what's called the TSH, which is the thyroid stimulating hormone, and that's typically what's tested.
Yeah.
And so when we're testing thyroid, just looking at that one marker, we're actually looking at how much is the brain telling the thyroid to make.
Thank you.
But what we do want to be considering is what you've just said,
Yes.
how much T3 and how much T4. They're the only 2 ones we measure. We don't measure T1 and T2, but there's some really interesting research that's coming out now that is saying, well, actually that T2 potentially does play a role, and it does do some of these other functions in the body. Typically the T4 is inactive, and we think about it in terms of it not really doing a lot. But I think that's one of those watch this space. We're going to at one stage come out and say, oh, actually it does do some really important things.
Yes.
The body then has to convert those thyroid hormones between all of those different ones, but it needs to convert from T4 through to T3. And T3 we think of as being the most active of the thyroid hormones and being involved in all of those really important bodily functions that are going on. And then we've got the calcitonin, which, is connected more with sort of calcium and regulation of other things. And, over time we've sort of not really given that its level of appreciation that it needs either.
Can I just do a little side spin? Because I read a science article last night, because I can't help myself. I'm always
love it, don't you?
I'm always researching stuff. They actually discovered a brand new gland just recently, like as of last week, that sits at the top of the throat behind the nasal cavity. There's actually a very small little gland there. They don't know what it does.
Wow, how
But this is like a new discovery. So I just kind of want to say that because, again, with the thyroid, we don't know everything about this thyroid, right? And it does so many things. And like you were just saying, the role of the brain, the pituitary, what are all of the things that are happening there and influencing the thyroid. I don't think we really fully understand everything that happens.
I don't think we understand even, we tend to think we know everything, but it's a continual learning process. And what's really interesting, and you sort of just alluded to this, the thyroid gland itself makes the hormones, but we don't necessarily understand the role that that's playing in all of these other organs, because the thyroid releases these hormones, but all of these other appendages, parts of our body have receptors to those thyroid hormones. And it's almost like that lock and key. The hormone comes, tells another part of the body to do a function. And we're still really learning. I think we're going to know so much more.
We don't know half the stuff that we think we know, really, And I love that you've used the term lock and key, because that's exactly what happens, from a chemical perspective. It's really just everything's just messaging everything else all the time to go, oh, hello, you need to do this now. Oh, hello, you need to stop doing, you need to stop doing that now. All of these things that are playing out all over the body. And like, if I guess we're saying in a really simple term, it controls metabolism, for example, but there's a whole process involved in that. It's not so much as just one thing. From that one thing comes a whole scope of different other chemicals that are changing and going up and down and, reverting constantly. So that's why I appreciate the thyroid so much, I think, because I know it does so much. I know it's linked very specifically for women's health as well, breast tissue and reproductive organs and things like that. So it's really important that we are a little bit more aware of what's happening with our thyroid gland before it gets to a point further down the track potentially of disease.
Yes, I would absolutely. I'm an absolute advocate for early detection and preventative healthcare across the board, not just for the thyroid, but for everything. But with my own passion for thyroid.
Yeah, definitely. Your lived experience. And so let's talk a little bit about, because there's two specific things that come up for people, hyperthyroidism, hyperthyroidism. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about hypo. So this is
sure. So hypo means low.
Yes.
Low. So what that means is that the thyroid isn't releasing enough of those important hormones that we've just mentioned, enough T3, potentially T4. And so we don't get enough of those messengers going around the body doing all those important functions. And so if somebody's hypothyroid, and I'll just explain, if your TSH is high, it actually means you've got low thyroid. Some people get confused by that because it doesn't sort of follow logical sense. But a higher TSH, and then looking at that and thinking what's going on with those thyroid hormones, potentially we're not making enough of those thyroid hormones, which has that flow-on effect. So women feel really sluggish, fatigued, hair may be falling out. Interestingly, our eyebrows, if we sort of feel like our eyebrows are shrinking in,
wow,
that could be an interesting sign that we don't have enough thyroid hormones, because our body preferentially says, well, I need to keep your heart going. I need to keep you functioning. Don't need your eyebrows. Yeah.
I know.
We would disagree.
So true.
But women often, say it's eyebrows or hair falling out or their hair changes texture, but they just, they have more propensity to put on weight even when they're doing all the things that they've already done in the done in the past. Cold hands and feet are another really common sign, but just that mental fatigue or brain fog is that is more what we would expect when someone's thyroid is slow or sluggish, or that hypothyroid picture.
Yeah. And I want to go back to the high level of thyroid stimulating hormone indicating low. So just if people can think about a visualization there, I guess what the brain's actually doing is going, I'm just going to send out a message and tell you to do this now. Oh, you're not listening. Yeah. I'm just going to send out some more. Nope, still not listening.
Yes.
So it's just this constant, because it's not getting that feedback loop.
Yes.
Because everything goes through the bloodstream. And so because that hormone, that thyroid hormone isn't getting released, none of it's actually going back up to the brain and saying, oh, no, I've released that. You're good now. You can switch it off. So that's why the levels are so high, because it's constantly sending out a signal to go, hello.
I think about it, it's like it's whipping the horse.
Yeah.
It's like, come on.
It's just being really needy. It's like, come on already. Are you going to do it or what? Yeah. And nothing happens. And that's why that's so high. So hopefully maybe that will help resonate with people a little bit as that confusion, because I know like in that way it can be really confusing. It's like, but my thing's really high, so how is that really low?
Yes.
But try and think of it that way. It's just that signal just not being heard. So it's like sending it again and again and again. But yeah, and so what about, I guess, what can cause hyperthyroidism?
So we can have hyperthyroidism, one, because we don't have all of the raw ingredients that we need to be making those thyroid hormones. Iodine is a really big player in terms of making our thyroid hormones. We need, selenium and iron and, all of these other, zinc, lots and our B vitamins, all of these things to create them. So one is we may not have the capacity to make them, but it can also be autoimmune.
Yes.
It can also be, and that's what I had, an autoimmune Hashimotos, that type of presentation where the immune system's been attacking the thyroid gland. And so the capacity of the thyroid gland shrinks in terms of its ability to make those thyroid hormones. And just in terms of that TSH, typically we would see someone having a higher TSH when they're hyperthyroid, but we can also have what we call like a subclinical, that a hyperthyroidism. A person may still have a lot of sluggish thyroid symptoms, but their pathology results, their TSH still looks okay.
Yeah.
And so really that's where it's about asking more questions, finding someone that understands the thyroid and can really help support them, because it would be better to pick it up at that subclinical stage rather than once it's already become more entrenched.
Yeah, and we're lucky that we live in a culture where we're able to go and have these little tests done, right? So if you are listening and this is starting to ring a bell for you, you've noticed maybe your hair is looser, falling out, your eyebrows are creeping in, there might be a reason for this. And this is always a good indicator to just do a little bit of exploration, not to freak out, right? Not to go, oh my God, like I've got all this stuff. No, it doesn't mean anything. It could just be like, your eyebrows are changing, everything changes. So many different things change in our body every single day. And there could be multiple reasons why these things are happening, but we're very lucky in that we can have some tests to start pinpointing some of these things as well.
Absolutely.
And let's talk about hyperthyroidism.
So this is almost the opposite, that the thyroid's producing too many hormones. And so in this presentation, we would have quite a low TSH, typically under 0.5 as a result. So we actually have too much thyroid hormone going around. So the sorts of symptoms that we'd experience are almost the total opposite of sluggish thyroid. We would actually be almost like, feeling hot. We would be perspiring a lot. We're likely to have some anxiety because everything just feels revved up. People tell me they feel like, the heart's going really fast. And in many ways, this gets picked up way earlier. Yeah,
because it's very uncomfortable. Yeah, so I can understand that. Yeah. And again, it's that opposite needy effect of the brain. Yeah. It's like, oh, okay, you're good. You're releasing lots of the stuff. I don't need to tell you anything. Now, it's that opposite effect. That's why the TSH is low. Is because it's like, oh, no, I'm constantly being told now. I'm doing my job. Okay, you're doing your job. Like, calm down. It's all right.
Like, calm the farm.
Calm down, everybody. Calm down. Yeah, so I can understand that. And so what leads to hyperthyroidism?
So, again, there can be an autoimmune presentation, which is called Graves' disease. Again, it's because the immune system is reacting to something. We can also have nodules on our thyroid, and we can have nodules for various different reasons, but sometimes those nodules on our thyroid do produce a whole lot more thyroid hormone. And so typically at that point, the resolution is to destroy the thyroid gland, stop it making any, and women that have had to go through that sort of procedure or ultimately that surgery, depending on how it's done, have to then be on thyroid medication for the rest of their lives because we need it. We need what the thyroid produces.
Yeah,
so.
And the body is so interesting, isn't it? Because our immune response doesn't just happen for the sake of happening. It's there for a reason. So it's actually doing the right thing by attacking the thyroid. I know that sounds really strange, but it's not, because it's trying to self-preserve the rest of the body. And if it's going, oh, you're like really overstimulated and you need to calm down, so I'm going to force you to calm down and you have no say in the matter so that this being can stay alive, right?
Yeah. And our bodies, I think when we look at it from that perspective, we have a whole lot more appreciation for all the things that are going on. But the problem with it is if we're not looking at it through that lens, we're seeing all of these things as something we need to treat, we need to cut out, we need to manage, rather than seeing them initially as a messenger.
Yes.
You know, that our body's trying to tell us, hey, something's amiss here. You know, for instance, when we think about autoimmunity, we have to start thinking about the health of the digestive tract. We have to start thinking about, why is the immune system overreacting? Am I reacting to a food? And for me, removing gluten from my diet made a huge difference. And yet I don't have celiac disease. I don't have a specific reason to remove gluten, but, you know, my body was reacting to the gluten, and it was like night and day.
Yeah.
You know, that simple food is medicine approach. There was something in my diet that was triggering it. Now, gluten for me may not necessarily be gluten for everyone. Our bodies could have heavy metals that the body's trying to process. There can be hidden infections. Helicobacter pylori is really common in people's digestive tract, in their stomach, but it can trigger an autoimmune response in the body. And so we need to be, or in my mind, we need to be looking sort of at that layer underneath the presentation, not just at the messenger, but what's going on that's contributing to that message needing to be told.
And I love that you've brought up the gut, because it's so important. That's like the first indicator of everything in the body. And I've actually had a Helicobacter pylori infection myself. So it is pretty common to have Helicobacter pylori in your tummy. But I actually did get it to the point where it started getting quite persistent, and I had to go on a whole range of – this was in my 20s, and I think I was at uni, I was studying, my immune system was pretty low because I was doing – that
all-nighters?
Yes. One after the other, after the other, after the other. And I was drinking way too much Coca-Cola because I didn't know any better then, right? Trying to stay awake to do all my work. And I ended up with a Helicobacter pylori. And when then I went to the doctors, they were like, oh, you've got this. And I'm like, well, how did I end up with that? And they're like, well, I don't really know. They didn't really know.
It's really prevalent. And like you said, we all probably are exposed to it. It just depends how virulent it is and how much impact it's having on our health.
Yeah.
And, ideally I would like to think, in a perfectly well-balanced body, that the body can manage it.
Yeah.
But we don't live in a world where we're all going to have perfectly balanced, health and bodies.
Absolutely not.
I certainly know that, when I talk about my thyroid sort of experience, the lost years, the lost decade, it's only that ultimately for me, I knew that I had to be my own health advocate, and I went back to university and studied and learnt about this so that, I totally understood what was going on. And now I feel like I have better energy, better health in my early 50s than I did certainly in my late 20s and 30s and even into my 40s. So
I feel the same. I'm in my 40s now, and I feel exactly the same. I have more energy. I feel healthier. I'm definitely not bloated and holding inflammation anymore. I think that's the key thing, is that, and I say this regularly, is that just because all the food's available doesn't mean we have to eat everything.
That's an interesting point, isn't it?
And I mean, not everything's going to agree with us. That's the thing. I know I can't eat gluten. I just can't. I can get away with it for X amount of time, and I did that just recently when I went overseas. I ate all the pasta, all the pizza, and it only lasted till day 3. And by day 3, I was like, I can't do it anymore. Like, I'm in pain, I'm bloating, I'm feeling really uncomfortable. And as soon as I stopped doing that and gave myself a day or 2 off, I felt so much better.
Yeah.
Right? But my body had memory, and so it goes, okay, well, you can't do that, so you're going to cut it out. And I did, and I only eat it so rarely because I know that it causes me inflammation. But I think we have this perception of things that we should push through, or we are pushing through, or we're just eating things because we think we have to eat them because they're healthy, but they might not agree with us.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, what's your thoughts on that?
I was just going to say, isn't there a saying something about one man's something about poison? I don't know what the whole saying is, but what works for other people doesn't necessarily work for us. And it takes time to be able to be that connected with our body that we recognize that. Some people also are always bloated, and so they never have that experience like you had, like knowing what it feels like to be bloated and knowing what it feels like not to be, and thinking, well, what's changed? But the more we explore the role that food plays and can play around with it a little bit, it's not hard to think, oh, I'm going to avoid gluten for a week or two and just see how my body responds.
Yeah.
It kind of gives us some clues then.
It's the brain fog that I see and that I experience myself, that I know straight away when something doesn't agree with me. So that's the thing, is that understanding it takes time, like you said, to work these things out. It doesn't happen overnight. You've got to actually go through a process, and you have to grieve sometimes too, the loss of food that you really can't eat.
Well, I'll, just for anyone that's listening, 2 years, my GP, the lady that I was seeing, said, you've really got to give up gluten because of the thyroid condition. And at the time I was thinking to myself, I've got 5 little kids at home.
Yep.
I fill them up on pasta. We eat bread every day. I bake my own bread. This was back when everyone had a bread machine. You don't do that so much these days. But, I was baking cakes and treats for their lunchbox, all of these things. And in my mind, I was just like, I can't give this up.
Yeah.
2 years. And she said to me one day when I was sitting in her office, she says, just do it for 4 to 6 weeks. I'm not asking you to do it forever. Do it for 4 to 6 weeks. And it was only when I committed to do that. And for the first week, I was I was 100% committed, but not 100% educated. So I was still eating some things that I thought didn't contain gluten, like, for instance, rice bubbles. I thought, where's the gluten in those?
Yeah.
But actually they have malt in them.
Carrie.
This was a long time back.
know,
But,
yeah.
as I learned more, I remember that experience of where I woke up and just felt like, wow, I feel different.
Yeah.
And that was enough. And I really, other than occasionally being accidentally, exposed to gluten, it's probably about 15 years.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, everything is gluten-free in our house. It has to be. Like, I just find I'm so incredibly switched on and clear in my head when there's no gluten present in the house. Yeah. And I let the rules go every now and then, but that's because I know I can stop and I can get back on my wagon, because I know how I feel when I'm not exposed to it and how amazing that is. So I don't want it in my life for very long. Unless I'm going out with a friend and she wants I went out with a friend who's Italian and we went out for pasta. I was like, okay, well, one night, do you know what I mean? That's okay. And I can get away with that because my digestive system doesn't get it very often. It's like, okay, this is not ideal, Tracy, but we'll deal with it today, But like you said, when you've got a family and you're trying to just get the food prep done and you're trying to get them fed for the day because you've got those kids, you're going to look for the easiest way to do that and what you know, right?
Yes.
It's about that habitual thing of what you know and having to change and relearn everything. And that can be really daunting and overwhelming for people because they're having to try new foods, especially with kids. It's really hard because once they've got that, they're started off on something, it's hard to change that until their palate develops, right? So it is a challenge, but it's worth it because then at least these little inflammation problems that they might experience too actually aren't going to come through when they get into the teenage and adult years as well. So changing that is really important and crucial.
Yeah.
And so can I ask from your experience, how did you do that? What did you transition from your pasta meals over to something without gluten?
So in the early days, and admittedly this was 15 years ago, so there wasn't as many options as now.
Yeah.
I just simply, I would cook them pasta and I would just have the bolognese in my bowl. These days now I swap them out for things like zucchini zoodles or there's actually some really nice non-gluten, pasta options.
Yeah.
But I guess what I would say is a lot of those things in that gluten-free aisle at the supermarket aren't necessarily good for us foods. They're just gluten-free versions of some of the other processed foods.
Yes.
So I really, encourage people to focus on real foods. And, I just, in the end, have replaced the sandwich for lunch with a big bowl of salad with lots of yummy bits and pieces on it. And I actually, I feel better for it. I feel like I'm filling up my nutrition, capacity in my body more. And I just love it.
Yeah, same. Yeah, I'm exactly the same. I send Charlotte to school with antipasto food. So I'm sure she loves it though. It's always chicken and egg and cheese and, there's always lots of little things for her to pick at.
Who said lunch needs to be a sandwich, right?
I know. And I know it's the easiest thing because that's what we're so used to, but there is ways of doing it. So this example for example, is that I did cook chicken last night, but I made extra so that she's got some in her lunchbox today and she'll have it again tonight for dinner.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so we had that for dinner and then she'll have that in her lunchbox. And because it's protein, she doesn't need as much of it. And it's filling her up. It's giving her that brain signal of I'm actually eating food and I'm full, whereas carbohydrates don't so much do that. So they're needing more and more and more of them. So having that balance of good proteins and good fats and stuff, and then some carbs, a little bit here and there, is actually a little bit easier. It's just a matter of cooking that extra protein at night time.
You do need to be a little bit more organised and sort of thinking that little bit further in advance rather than let's just get this next meal on the table. It's, how do I, you know, I talk to people a lot about things like batch cooking and meal planning.
Yeah.
When you're transitioning from one way of eating to another, because it does take a lot more energy to kind of move away from some of those older ways that we've done things, those things that you mentioned before, habitually that, these are the foods we eat, to maybe moving to some new foods that we haven't been eating so much of before.
Yeah.
We have to get into a new habit. And so using some of those tactics to get ourselves into a habit, and then it becomes second nature. Yeah. I mean, I just don't even think about it anymore.
When I started this journey myself, it took a while because I researched, like you have to go, okay, well now I've got this product, what am I actually going to switch it for? And it does take time. It definitely takes time. It was definitely a process.
And a bit of trial and error too, because some foods that you think, oh, this is going to be the solution, you don't like them. And so you have to kind of...
Oh, yeah, I've tried. I've guinea pigged my family on a whole heap of stuff and my hubby's like, what is this? I'm not going to eat that. So it's like, oh, I really thought I had a winner there. It's not a winner, so I have to start again. So we've had that. And he loves it now though, right? Because he was a big eater of processed foods. Like he loved his sweets and now he's completely different. Like he's full keto, like working out, like... really fit and healthy.
But
he's
he feels
really
like
transitioned.
He has more energy because of it too.
Absolutely. And that took time. And what I found was, because it is hard when you're in a house and you're doing your thing and trying to get everyone else on board, it's that leading by example and not forcing it onto them, but just going, well, I'm going to do this and I'll still do some of that for you, but maybe just try this and see what you think, and trial and error. So that then hopefully there's a few things that you can pinpoint that people do like, and then you go, okay, well, I know I'll now not cook that one and I'll replace it with that one and no one will notice. You're going to be a bit ninja-y about it. And I found that that's helped us a lot. Like I simply don't have the foods in the house now. Like people have to go out of their way to get the bad food. Do you know what I mean? Like if you want it, you can go and get it. It's no problem. But
but it takes effort to do that.
Yeah, you're going to have to get it. Although it doesn't help now. They have all these door drops.
That's true.
But still. So let's talk a little bit while we're on the chat of food. What are some of the foods that we can up these iodine and zincs and all of these things that might be missing from our diet?
So I guess I would say, when we talk about the foods and trying to get these nutrients from the foods that we're eating, it really does depend on where that food's growing, where that food's grazing. For instance, iodine is really important for the thyroid. That comes particularly from seafood, from seaweeds. But there are other foods that contain a little bit, but that does depend on where those foods are growing as to how much iodine they have. Yeah. When it comes to iodine, I don't ever want someone just to think, oh, I have a thyroid condition, I better take some iodine. That's one, clinically I would always want them to test to see what the iodine level is like. Like most things in the body, there's a Goldilocks, not too much, not too little. You want it to be just right.
Yes.
And too much iodine can stimulate some of those autoimmune antibodies in some people. So I do test that. And if someone's really deficient, then we would be short-term supplementing to get their levels up. And then hopefully after that, they can maintain it by eating some of those higher iodine foods. We do need zinc that comes from, actually, again, seafood. So oysters are a really good source.
I'm a huge advocate for zinc. I talk about it nonstop. Yeah, it's so important, isn't it?
Yeah. But I for people that don't eat seafood, things like those green pepitas, the pumpkin seeds, meat is another source of zinc. Selenium's another really important one. Women, or not only women, but I usually say women and thyroid because, it's 5 to 10 times as many women have a thyroid condition as men.
Yeah.
So if I say women, I do mean everyone, but, women in more in particular. Yeah. And Hashimotos is more common as an autoimmune condition in women as well. selenium is really important for those to settle down some of that autoimmune response. And they're found in Brazil nuts. But again, it depends where those Brazil nut trees are growing as to how much selenium. So, based on someone's sort of story, we might think, well, maybe we'll just test out those Brazil nuts, a couple a day. But for others, we may supplement with that. But ultimately, we do want to be getting enough nutrients from the food we're eating. We don't want to be sitting down to a bowl of supplements for breakfast.
And it's really hard. I feel like it is getting more and more common for us to have to supplement because of the food quality out there. I'm curious to know what your thoughts on organ meat is because, organ meat, and I talk about this a lot, right? This is something that we've evolved out of and it has everything in it. And it's like, oh, why are we not eating our organs? And I know that I'm actually one of those people who doesn't eat enough organ meat, but I'm curious to know your thoughts on it as well.
So my husband would probably like nothing more than me to cook up some lamb's fry or something for breakfast, but the whole idea of it just kind of turns my stomach a little bit. I might think, steak and kidney pie. But again, I don't eat those, so because of the gluten issue. I actually take liver capsules.
Yes.
And I'll do those. I feel like they really help my energy. I feel like I'm giving my body what it needs in an appropriate kind of way because I don't eat organ meats regularly.
And you can get them, they're quite available now on liver capsules. So I'm glad you said that for those people who don't like it. And I've tried my daughter on liver chicken nuggets and stuff like that. She ate them, but afterwards she's like, Mommy, I didn't really like those. They didn't taste really nice. I appreciate you making them, but I didn't really like them. I was like, I tried. But, liver is hard because it does have a very specific taste, very specific taste. You don't need a lot of it. That's the thing. But it does have a very bitter taste for some people.
I think if you grow up on it, like if you start from a young age, just putting sort of blending a bit of liver into, say, some mince and making, something with it, then you're going to be more tolerable to it. But if as the first time of having it, it's such a different taste to what we are used to eating. But that said, give me some nice pate and I'm happy camper.
How interesting is that? Because pate is delicious. So you got all the fats in there. That's why it's like, the palate just goes, fat. I love it. Yeah, so that's pretty much what I had on my list as well, like a lot of seafood and eggs, organ meat, seaweed, turkey as well. I've got down on my little notes here. But not so much bananas. I've got bananas and strawberries, but I know that that's very minimal for those sorts of minerals. But I would love to know, do you have any further, information about iodine and the link between iodine and the thyroid? Like, why is it that we need to have good levels of iodine?
Because when we talk about things like the T3 and the T4, those numbers, the 3 and the 4, are related to the number of iodine molecules in those. And so if we don't have enough iodine, we're not going to be able to make thyroid hormones. And so that becomes really problematic if we can't make them. So we do need iodine, and our food supply is not abundant in it. Our soil here in Australia isn't abundant in iodine. So that can be problematic from that level. I think these days we do tend to eat food from all over the world. So, maybe we're getting a little bit more than we would have, but it is certainly something to consider. If a person came to me and said, I've recently been diagnosed with a thyroid condition, or I think there's something amiss with my thyroid, I would want to be testing and then talking to them specifically about how do we rectify that deficiency if there is a deficiency there.
Yeah, and that leads me to my point here of what people can do if they suspect maybe they have a thyroid problem. So say they haven't actually, had the diagnosis or anything yet, but say they're listening to this and they go, that's interesting. Like, I feel like maybe intuition is like the most powerful superpower we have, right? Our intuition. And I'm sure there's people listening going, hang on a second, this actually sounds, I think I need to source this out. So what do you think people should do if they suspect a potential thyroid issue?
So certainly I would say go and get some testing done. Go and talk to your doctor, get some more thorough testing. Typically, if you ask for that, you'll just have your TSH checked. If your TSH comes back within the reference range, they're not allowed through Medicare to test anymore.
Yeah, right.
Whereas, if you come and see someone like me or, a naturopath, somebody else, we can order some of that testing privately and we can get like more thorough testing, which will give you more information about your hormone levels, whether there's any autoimmunity. And it might cost you, say, $150 to have that done. But to me, that's really a valuable use of your $150. Yeah. Either you rule it out and say, great, that's not me, or you rule it in and you say, great, I've picked this up early, what do I do next?
Yeah, I love that.
It really, there's so much you can do at that point once you know what you're managing. I think if you're experiencing a lot of thyroid or sluggish thyroid symptoms, you're feeling pretty wretched. You're not feeling like you're on your A game. And so getting just, incremental improvement there can make a huge difference to how you feel across the board. And that's worth it to me.
And one of the interesting things because obviously, again, I've done some reading is Harvard University has done some studies on how thyroid hormone is very similar to estrogen. Mm-hmm. And so obviously the body can actually read it actually the wrong way and think it's actually estrogen. So it was interesting before when you said we were talking about the link between the thyroid and the reproductive area, because I feel like they are so linked together that there's pieces of the puzzle that haven't been matched yet as far as studies go. But that in itself, and just telling me that the thyroid hormone is very similar to estrogen, could potentially lead to disease if the body's reading it the wrong way. What's your thoughts on that as well?
Sure. I think that's, again, one of these watch this space as we continue to evolve our understanding of the connection, but everything in the body is connected. And the levels of estrogen impact some of those conversion issues with thyroid hormones. It impacts the way that we respond to our thyroid. So I don't even know whether it's estrogen impacts thyroid or thyroid impacts estrogen, or they just both constantly impact each other. But yes, you're absolutely right. There's certainly an interplay between those. There's an interplay between thyroid and some of our blood sugar regulating hormones and all sorts of other processes in the body. And so again, they're just little clues. If you have a lot of estrogen or like female hormonal imbalance type symptoms, you would want to be getting your thyroid checked as well, just to see what's going on there.
I'm really glad you said that. Yay! That's awesome. Is there anything you wanted to add before
it's been wonderful having had an opportunity to talk to you about thyroid. As you can probably hear, I'm really a big advocate of people getting tested early, understanding whether their thyroid is something they do need to support, just because of all of the far-flung impacts that it has on our health.
Yeah.
And I guess the message is there's lots that we can do. If you're told by a doctor the only thing is either one, take your thyroid out, or two, be on a medication, there is a lot that we can do to support your health. I can't promise you won't end up with surgery or on a medication. We just don't know. But there really is a lot that we can do to help support the body, calm down the inflammatory processes, calm down that immune system, shore up our nutrient needs, so that we have everything we need to be making these good hormones. And we can see how much benefit we can get. I feel like it would allow the medication to work more effectively if we need to be doing both. So in that sense, it's a win-win.
Yeah, and I've seen plenty of cases of people like yourself with Hashimotos who have actually removed it completely, right? And there's a Dr. Courtney Hunt, who I follow regularly. She's an obstetrician gynecologist in America, but she had Hashimotos as well, and she changed her diet to a keto diet, right? And her Hashimotos, after a period of time, no longer exists.
Yeah.
So this is the thing, is that there's lots of other environmental things at play that are going to impact the thyroid. And I would encourage everyone, like you said before, is to investigate a little bit more before we go to the point of removing something altogether, just in case we can actually work on actually reducing that, especially if the thyroid's inflamed. If there's an opportunity to work on it and improve it, surely that's got to be a good option as well. Yeah.
And we'll learn a lot about our body as we do that, along the lines of what you said before. You've learnt what your body feels like when it feels good. You know what it feels like when it doesn't.
Yeah.
That's really valuable information later on.
Yeah. And so if people are listening to this and they'd love to reach out to you, where can they find you?
Sure. So my website is just www.carriereedy.com, and I'll spell that. Don't know what my mum was thinking. Everyone thinks my name's Carrie. It's Carrie. So CarrieReedy. And I have a home office. I work in Canning Vale.
Perfect.
So see people on Zoom, see people in person, whatever works.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming in again.
Oh, this was so fun.
I know. I love our chats. And I know that we've got a whole list. We actually had a whole list to pick from for our chat today. And we picked this one, didn't we? Because we know that this is something that we both see a lot of.
Yeah,
and we're like, have to get this information out. But I can't wait to have you back. It will be in 2023. Can you believe it?
I do not even know where this year has gone, really.
I know. It's crazy. I feel the same. Like I'm literally wrapping up now. I can't believe that it's getting to that point where this will, it's going to air in December. So yeah, we're wrapping up season 2 into season 3 coming in February. So I look forward to having you back then, and I'm sure we're going to pick another awesome topic.
Yeah, sounds great.
So until next time, everybody, take care. Make sure that if any of this resonates with you, you go and check that out with your GP or healthcare provider now, or touch base with Carrie. I'm sure she'll be very happy to help you out or send you in the right direction. But until next time, see you later.
The information, views and opinions expressed on this podcast should not be used or treated as a substitute for nutritional, medical, psychological or other advice by a qualified medical health professional. Hosts and guests on the podcast express their own opinions, experiences and conclusions. And nothing on the podcast should be used to diagnose, treat, cure or prevent any medical conditions. The podcast is not intended to replace any medical or mental health treatment. All information and advice provided is for general well-being and does not take individual cases into consideration. Neither Tracy Saltis, guests on the podcast, or any sponsors endorse the opinions, views or conclusions expressed or shared on the podcast. Tracy Saltis takes no responsibility for any symptoms or consequences as a direct or indirect result of this podcast.